From Ticker, this is Black Belt Leader. Here's Karen Gately.
Welcome to Black Belt Leader. I'm Karen Gately. On the show, we're going to be exploring further a topic we have covered recently, and that is wellbeing, why it matters to productivity, why it matters ultimately to an organisation's success. Today, we've asked a couple of people who can share some facts with us to come on the show. So soon we're talking to Mccrindle, who is an award-winning social researcher and the author of a new book. And then later on, we'll get our employment lawyer back on the show to ask some questions around what employers' obligations are, what employees' rights are through this COVID-19 time. So before we speak to Mark, let's have a look at some of the facts that we found. In a survey of over 1,000 employees, 72% of respondents regarded wellbeing as the most important aspect of their workplace, rating it above flexible working hours and their relationships with colleagues. 83% also believe it's up to the employer to facilitate wellbeing in the workplace. So clearly when it comes to actually implementing wellbeing initiatives, clearly we need to understand how we can make sure that the right elements are in place to drive satisfaction and engagement. So those facts are interesting. I would say that our wellbeing is fundamentally influenced by our relationships, by work-life balance, by a whole bunch of other factors. So we're excited to be joined now by, as I said, Mark Mccrindle. Mark is a award-winning researcher who's recently released a book called Wellbeing Work, or Work Wellbeing, should I say. Mark, welcome.
Thanks, Karen. Great to be with you.
So let's kick into, start off with your book. Obviously, you've recently released it, and help our viewers to understand, why you've done that. What's the core themes that you're trying to share through that writing?
Well, the majority of us who are working spend more than a third of our waking hours at work. And for many, if you include commute time in that mix, and for those working 40 or more hours a week, it can be close to half, sometimes more than half of our waking hours at work. And that therefore means that work has to be a key place to get well-being, thriving in our life right. And as you shared from that research that we ran, we found that for the majority of people, the biggest blocker to them thriving at work is the leadership if they can't get well-being and culture right. And also the majority of workers say that it's up to the employer to manage that and to make sure that their place is a workplace of thriving well-being. So for all those reasons, it's a key topic.
Yeah. Absolutely. And there's so much just in that, right, that I'd love to explore with you. Before we get into that, help us to understand your views of what's going to happen, the future of work. Clearly, our current work reality has been dramatically changed. If you're sitting in Melbourne, certainly it's entirely different, or Victoria, should I say. What is your research showing? What do you believe is coming down the path?
Well, the trend to work from home that's really accelerated through COVID globally has been a trend that was on anyway. And so we just have, and we will have even more into the future, a scattered workforce rather than a gathered one. And that means that the issues of connection, engagement, managing loneliness, let alone the productivity issues and the training and corporate alignment, getting the focus on the roles of the organization, it matters even more. We can't just rely on the ad hoc connecting with people in the workplace. We can't just assume that the collegiality and the development of our teams is going to happen as we interact in a workplace. So these issues of leadership, engagement, training, connection, and indeed looking after the welfare of our people, particularly around work well-being, matters even more in a COVID world. And they're just some of the trends. We've got people sometimes holding multiple jobs. We've got more gig economy workers into the future. And the reality is, in this time, but it's been the trend anyway, work is one of the few connection points that most people now have in their life. It's one of the few stable points when everything else has sort of gone out the window. And so again, getting well-being right in the workplace by leaders matters more than ever today.
Yeah. Look, I couldn't agree more. A lot of the conversations I'm having with leaders centre around the fact that we can no longer actually just allow, engagement, relationships, culture to happen via osmosis because we're hanging out in the same space together. We do have to actually create ways in which we can be deliberate to have connection, to have collaboration, to build those relationships, even when we're not hanging out in the same physical space. So what are some of the things, again, in this COVID kind of driven world right now and clearly beyond, what are some of the things that you think are going to make the biggest difference to an employer's ability to influence? As we said, heard your research suggests that people expect their employers to get into a driving seat and proactively influence wellbeing. What matters? What do you see working?
Well, firstly, it's placing a priority on that culture of engagement, on that culture of people development. It's true that for some people, work is just a place that they go, it's just a job that they do. But for many, many more, work is a key place of social connection, of contribution, of belonging, of their identity. And so the employer, really should have a high view of work, have a high perspective of the impacts that it can make in the lives of their employees, and double down on that, particularly in a time like this. And that is to say, be intentional in developing culture, be focused on the skills development of our team, ensure that we have that EQ, that emotional intelligence to check in on our people, to make sure that they are feeling connected and that they're clear on their responsibilities, but on their lines of connection with the team. We've got to facilitate that team and those interactions a bit more as well, because, again, people aren't always in the workplace, or even if they are, they're perhaps not there every day. And we're seeing, and we found it in our research as well, the biggest stress that workers face, or the biggest issue they face in the workplace now, is not the physical health. We tend to have that pretty good in most workplaces, the workplace health and safety, but it's the mental health and stress. And that's what we've got to make sure that we're cognizant of as leaders in our workplaces today.
Absolutely. Again, one of the challenges I see for a lot of employers is getting their own mind around, what is reasonable concern that they should have around people's mental health, mental well-being. How do they differentiate between someone who really is struggling versus somebody who's just taking advantage? That's a big fear. It's that, people are pulling the mental health card. What would you say to those employers? How do you actually make sure that, we are holding people accountable, we are, making sure that everyone's being fair, but we're also making psychological injury, for example, something that we're working overtime to avoid. And if we have mental health impacts, that we should do something about it.
Yeah. Well, we found in the research that the two biggest challenges, the biggest issues that workers faced, was either poor culture or poor leadership. And ultimately, the culture is enabled and set by the leader anyway. It's that tone at the top that flows down. So both come back to the leader. So the starting point to manage issues or mental illness in the workplace, at least as far as the employer is concerned, is to make sure that they are modeling great leadership. Leaders are defined by the people developed and the culture that they set. So those basic things do come first. It's setting an example of what healthy work looks like, being clear on their KPIs or on their own goals, working hard, achieving those, setting that diligent example, of course, but also showing that they have work-life integration as well, that they have other responsibilities in their life that matter, and not being a poor example of that, but rather a healthy and I think balanced example of that. And it's being clear, it's casting the vision, it's calling our team members to achieve that. We say there's three elements of that. We need to be clear on the purpose of the organization. We need to be clear on the culture, and we've discussed that. And also the impact part of that, celebrating the wins, giving the feedback, showing the impacts that have been made. That helps us sort of celebrate the wins and and get ready for the next season ahead. So it's being clear on all of those issues. Now, people are bringing other baggage to work, and it's not the responsibility of the employer to be those mental health professionals. It's not their responsibility to untangle every issue. But the last thing we ought to do is add more baggage to the baggage that people are carrying in their life with relationships or financial stress or other health issues. But rather the job of the leader is to have a vision, not just for the organization, but for the team, and help alleviate some of, at least not add to the baggage, and make work a place of thriving, a place of benefit to the teams, not just a place where they get the financial well-being, but they get the social, the developmental, and the achievement well-being that comes from a job well done.
Yeah. So what impact do you think this really has for employers? I mean, obviously we've talked about avoiding the risk of mental illness and undermining well-being. Why else do you think, or does your research say, that this is something employers need to take seriously?
Yeah. Well, hopefully, we've got employers that have that high view of leadership where they realize that actually the business is not just a place to generate profits. Of course, that matters, but a place to create the common good and to see their employees thrive, their families thrive, and hopefully the community where they are planted thrive as well. So if we've got that more enlightened view of the benefits of organizations to create value beyond just financial, then I think that's fantastic. But for those looking for an ROI, a return on that investment, our research looked at that and we found 3 clear benefits of leaders who create cultures of well-being for their teams. And number 1, their staff are more engaged in the job. And so you're going to get productivity benefits. And that's obvious. If we've got great culture, great leadership, clear vision, and we're looking after our people, they're going to be more engaged. The second factor is that they have longer tenure. So we have less turnover. We have reduced costs of staff replacement. And the third key factor is that they are brand ambassadors. So we call it a net culture score. The fact is they become ambassadors for that brand. They're net referrers, if you like, because of the employer brand that exists, and they're more likely to share that goodwill with others. So they're 3 tangible benefits that come from organizations that have an enlarging leadership model, a culture of thriving, and work well-being at the core of what they do.
Fantastic. So for the leaders because clearly what I've heard us say so far is that culture does matter. We need a culture that has a positive impact on well-being. We need to make sure as leaders that we're leading by example and we're bringing, healthy behaviours that reflect our own commitment to our own well-being, as an example. For the leaders who don't really have a great deal of experience or clarity around what a great culture actually looks like, what do you think some of the core attributes are? What do I need to make sure is actually happening on a day-to-day basis to create this environment that is healthy?
Yeah. Well, we discuss this in the book a fair bit and look at the different elements that make up culture, but firstly, you've got the values, and the values can't just be statements on a wall. They've got to be lived out and believed, but that is core, because we have a new generation that are looking not just for a job, but an opportunity to make a difference, to have an impact, and that the values of the organization, the impacts that they make really do matter to this organization. Secondly, it's how we treat our people. And we need to make sure that the customer comes second. It's the internal customer, it's the staff that comes first. If we can show that we've got their back, we support them, we're looking after them, we're growing them, they will then be empowered to give the best possible customer or client service. So it's looking after our teams and our culture, in that first instance. And then the third factor is really just to model that, and often it takes a little while for culture to change. It's something that's shared by everyone. We can't just set a policy and have that culture change. But if we have that if we're working towards it, we're modeling it over time, it will change. Bring in the new generations and making sure as they start out, they are really equipped to lead and they're modeling that great leadership that's exemplified to them so that they can continue to shape that culture. And therefore, it can't be about a program. We said in the book, leadership is not about the next program, it's about the next generation. and instilling those values into them and equipping them on the right road. And I think if we do that, we start to see the culture change over a period of time, and it's never done. We need to constantly keep an eye on the culture, because toxicity will emerge in any relationships. This is how we are. We have issues with people, but if we keep on the focus on that, we can have that thriving culture for the long term.
Yeah. So what do you observe being one of the most common mistakes that leaders make in this whole journey? So we've got this really clear cultural vision, if you like. We've got our value statements, they're written down. We're striving hard to make them more than just a poster on the wall in reception. But we're still really struggling to get traction. What are some of the things in that moment that you see holding organisations back?
Well, it's avoiding the reaction to reach for a program, a fad. Particularly as we talk about well-being, we take that broad view of well-being, that it's about human flourishing, it's about thriving, it's about being the best that we can be. And sometimes it's equated to wellness. When people think about well-being in the workplace, they think about getting a fruit bowl or having stretch breaks or having yoga at the team retreat or something like that. But all of those are just veneers. I mean, we need natural light, we need fresh air. All of that is important, and having the right rhythms in our day in terms of not having people work effectively, and hopefully some healthy food. All of that is great, but that is not going to transform an organization into a place of well-being. They are great nice to haves, but it needs to be far more intentional than that, and it needs to come from the leader. They need to have a view that of what healthy leadership is, of what healthy relationships are, and of really having that vision to grow their team. And I think as soon as we get that right, we start to thrive in that space. One thing that marks our Australian society and our workplace is diversity. And so we're going to make sure that, we have a team that does model our society, gender diversity and cultural diversity and generational diversity as well. But the key fact for a leader is to bring unity amidst that diversity. For these leaders, diversity is not a symbol, it's an asset. They see the benefit of that diversity. They work hard to get the integration of those various groups to really connect and to really focus on that organizational goal. They have alignment and unity amidst that diversity because they're clear on the vision, on the outcomes. And so it helps us thrive, it helps us connect across difference, and all celebrate at the end as we achieve those goals.
Absolutely love it. Totally agree with you. And I think if I had to point to one thing, if I had a magic wand, I often say, if I could change one capability, it would be the skill around having a tough love conversation. That is, dealing with difficult things and dealing with them well. And then I would apply that magic wand to the so-called high performer who's bringing in serious amounts of money or clients or whatever those outcomes are, but they're behaving badly. And that in my experience is a really tough moment for a lot of leaders. I'm dependent on this person's contribution to the financial bottom line, but they're behaving in ways that are contrary to our values. And it's compromising in that moment that can have devastating consequences. So how often do you see that tolerance, the putting up with, or the watering down the strength of our conviction around culture being an issue?
Yeah, it sure is, Karen. That's exactly right. And it's back to what are our values, what's our vision, and what's our time frame. If it's just about the short wins and the profits, well, then we understand why people are accepting poor behavior. But of course, what gets modeled and what gets seen gets noted and becomes the culture. And so quickly, from one toxic issue, you end up with a toxic culture or organization. That's not sustainable. So it is about being clear on the bigger picture and the vision and the team. It's about understanding that it is about the many, not just the individual, and not making compromises in that sense. And it's about having the longer term view. That's the difference between a manager who's focused on the now and a leader who's focused on the long term, or a manager who's focused on systems and processes, and the leader who's focused on people and their interactions. And we said in the book that the key marker of success of a leader is not what they achieve in their tenure, but it's what they achieve in the long term. It's by what the legacy that they leave. And so in that regard, leaders, they've got the IQ, but they've got the EQ. Leader of head understands strategy and process, but with the heart, they understand people, and they bring those two aspects together and do create the long-term thriving organizations that endure.
Absolutely agree with you. If I reflect back on my own career, there are leaders that I've met along the way that are still my yardstick. They still pop into my head in certain moments. When I see behaviours that are really unacceptable, my mind will go to those leaders and literally think, oh, what would they think? Yeah. So I agree. We have the ability to profoundly impact the way people behave, not only now, but into the future. What their version of being a good leader is, having a positive impact on the human beings in their workplaces. So we're going to talk to you a bit more about this, but before we do, I want to turn now to our weekly segment, which is actually called WTF at Work. And we're going to ask you a question. Well, I'm not going to ask you a question, I'm lying. We're going to put a scenario up for you to then give us your immediate reaction to this particular scenario. This is going to share that with you now. So on the first day of my new job, a light bulb blew and I offered to fix it. I jumped up on the table and I heard a loud crunch. My pants ripped. My new boss couldn't stop laughing and then offered to take them off and stitch them up. Could you imagine your new boss sewing up your pants on the first day of your job? WTF. What do you have to say to that, Mark?
Yeah, that's an awkward situation all around. And, I think leaders are aware of, and again, an EQ response, a sensitivity approach is to see the awkwardness of that, to have that empathy for the staff member involved, particularly being their first day. But to also be aware of boundaries and not sort of creating a problem by overstepping their situation, creating more awkwardness by making an offer that just seems well, it's just more embarrassing than anything. So in a situation like that, it's to help them recognise the awkwardness of the situation, name it, but say, hey, if you want to head off, if we can help you in any way, we need us to call you a taxi or whatever you need to get out of the situation and save as much face as possible. We've got you, we back you, and we'll sort it out. So yes, those awkward situations, but then being able to also have a laugh about it once the moment has passed, rather than it becoming the unmentioned thing. And hopefully, if that's done in a warm and supportive way, you'll have an employee for the long term through that.
Absolutely agree. I love that response, because the reality is lots of human things happen in the workplace, awkward, embarrassing things. And in my own world, one of my greatest discomforts in life is observing somebody else who's embarrassed. Like I really can't cope with that. So absolutely, we need to, as leaders, clearly avoid that moment if we can on some level. We need to see it when it happens and do what we can to put people at ease. But I agree, also maintaining a bit of personal space and boundaries. I'm not sure how that offer was made, but I'm not sure I'd be handing over my pants to my boss either to sew up in the workplace.
Well, exactly. And, there are, if it's a male boss and a female employee, well, then you would get another female staff to help out, and vice versa. If it was a younger employee and it's an older boss, then you would get, a younger team member to help out. And again, just being aware of the natural relationships, what's going to be the most supportive and the most alleviating of the embarrassment is important to keep in mind. And, great leaders, they know their people. They know who's the best person to help manage that situation, and they can call them to assist. And that might be less awkward than having the boss involved themselves.
Absolutely agree. I've seen lots of situations where we needed to go and get the older lady or the younger boy or the whoever it is that can actually make people feel a bit more, this is normal, this is okay, as we were, let's move on.
That's right.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing that with us. I'm going to take us back to our topic for the day because obviously you've got such a wealth of knowledge and research, obviously, to share around this topic. So coming back to well-being, and again, we've just described through our WTF, stuff happens. And one of the things I observe really impacting healthy workplace environments are people who are dealing with a temper issue, and really struggling to communicate in ways that are healthy and constructive. What is your primary advice to these people? How do you learn to channel that emotion to be effective in the way you communicate when you're really, at times, genuinely upset with people or frustrated with them or whatever the case may be?
Well, it's a key issue to get right because no one can respect a leader who can't manage themselves. We've got to lead ourselves before we can lead other people. And we've got a new generation coming to the workplace that just won't make excuses for that sort of thing. And they're not used to being roused on or being humiliated or being sworn at or put down. And they know from day one on the job what's acceptable and what's not. They're well aware of their rights and of what's appropriate, and good on them for that. So we can't just make excuses and say, well, hey, I'm just a short-tempered person, that's who I am, or sorry, but I just use a bit of salty language from time to time. We just can't do it, and we can't justify that in front of the team. Particularly, we've got diverse teams, we've got to respect our teams, and in a workplace where people can feel harassed or bullied through that sort of language or intimidated, it's no longer appropriate. We can't just give it the green light. So I would say to people who do, and we all understand we're in tense times, we get frustrated, we get let down, we have an expectation, and what comes back to us is not up to scratch. Understand that. So what we have to do is respond rather than react. We have to, and if that means taking a few minutes when we hear that to collect our thoughts and respond appropriately, fantastic. If it means that we're best off responding through a text or an email before we do the face-to-face thing, then because that we can put it in writing, reflect on it, change it, and then send it. Then let's do that. Let's utilize the tools that we have, the time that we have. Maybe it's using another team member to be an intermediary or to give the initial feedback. Whatever it is to manage our emotions, we need to do. Because if we can't manage our emotions, if we get reactionary, then everyone else has a license to do that as well. And you can't run a professional operation when people are responding emotively and reacting all of the time.
Totally agree. Mark, that's been fantastic. I really appreciate your time and sharing your wisdom. Help our viewers to understand where they can get hold of your book.
Yeah, well, that's the book there called Work Wellbeing, and the subtitle Leading Thriving Teams in Rapidly Changing Times. So it's available. You go to workwellbeing.com.au and you can access the book for sale there, but through all good bookshops as well as online, you can access that. But workwellbeing.com.au will take you to get some more information on the book.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again. I really do appreciate your time today, as I said, and look forward to perhaps having you back sometime. So much to share. Thank you again.
Thanks, Karen.
So that's all we have for today. Thank you for joining us. If there are topics you would like us to cover, please get in touch via our social media channels or, of course, our website, corporatedojo.com. And remember, you choose. Will you be an ordinary or an awesome leader of your people?
There are now more ways to watch Ticker. Download our apps for Apple and Android devices. We're live on Twitter and YouTube Live. And you can catch us on Amazon Alexa and Google Home. Head to the Ticker website for more.